And now to the Republican presidential campaign, with just a few days before the voters across the country weigh in. Kwame Holman has our report.
The candidates largely were focused on the 10 states that vote on Super Tuesday. But Mitt Romney took time to swing through Bellevue, Washington, hoping to secure a win in tomorrow's caucuses there.
There are going to be a bunch of states that are going to make their mind up in the next couple of days. But you guys are first, and so your voice is going to be heard. It'll just make a big difference. So please make sure and go to the caucus site. Get your friends to do the same thing.
Ron Paul also was in Washington, speaking in Spokane.
You know, things have been going very well, but we keep coming back to Washington because we expect to do real well here.
From the Pacific Northwest, Romney headed to Ohio, a critical Super Tuesday prize, where Rick Santorum held a small lead in a new poll. Santorum appealed for support today in Chillicothe.
You have a chance to make a statement that we want someone who is a conservative in their heart, in their soul, in their mind. Someone who's not afraid to stand up and talk about all of the issues.
In a press release, but not on the stump, Santorum also criticized Romney for a 2002 video. It showed him campaigning for governor of Massachusetts and boasting about getting federal funds, something he's slammed Santorum for in the past.
And the money is in Washington. And I've learned from my Olympic experience that if you have people that really understand how Washington works and have personal associations there, you can get money to help build economic development opportunities.
Meanwhile, Newt Gingrich campaigned again in Georgia, the state he once represented in Congress. He went after both Romney and Santorum.
Unlike Governor Romney, I'm not going to Washington to manage the decay, and unlike Senator Santorum, I'm not going to Washington to join the team. I want to create a new team called the American People who force dramatic, bold change on Washington.
Georgia shaped up as a must-win for Gingrich in his bid to stay alive in the Republican race.
And that brings us finally tonight to the analysis of Shields and Brooks. Syndicated columnist Mark Shields and New York Times columnist David Brooks. Welcome, fellas.
Jeffrey.
Now, last week, when you sat here, it was Mitt Romney must win Michigan. He did. How important was it, David?
It was important. It makes him the presumptive nominee, I think, again. And so I think it was partly his victory, but mostly Santorum's defeat.
In what sense?
Well, I think Santorum had a steam going, but then he went down into social conservative territory in that final week, and so you see the wall building around his campaign. He had the social conservatives, but he sort of lost some outreach to people outside that ideological vanguard, and that sort of hemmed him in. And so if you look especially among women, Republican women went more for Romney. And so we have a classic confrontation, which we've seen in races before, where Santorum has the more downscale voters, Romney the more upscale. And overall, there are just more Romney type of voters than there are Santorum voters. That doesn't mean it will be the case in Ohio. Ohio is a little like Michigan, but a little more downscale. So Santorum may be able to pull something off in that state.
Before you get to Ohio, what's your read on Michigan? How important was
Rick Santorum blew his chance. He will look back on Michigan as the missed opportunity of his public career. David's right. By his dwelling on issues, abandoning the very narrative that had brought him to where he was. I mean, the grandson of the miner, the blue-collar Republican who was concerned with manufacturing, with those who weren't part of the country club set. And he did that. This is a man who doesn't have a chip on his shoulder. He has a 2x4 on his shoulder. I mean, he goes after the president, accused him of snobbery for wanting people to go to college, and people wanting their children to go to college. And many of the people he's trumpeting as heroes, those who spend long days in difficult physical labor, most want their children to go to college. And then doing the unthinkable, attacking the icon of John Kennedy before the Houston ministers, when at a time of anti-Catholicism in the country, when there was a lot of it, he, the first Catholic ever elected, had to go into foreign alien territory and make the case that the Pope wasn't packing up to move to the White House, and accomplished it without losing his integrity. It's saying that made him throw up. That sort of stuff was just, it's not the kind of thing you expect in a bad lieutenant governor's race, let alone a good presidential race.
So now we look forward to Super Tuesday and Ohio. And you saw Kwame say Rick Santorum seems to have a slight lead there.
Right.
What are the stakes there now for him?
slight, though diminishing. So Santorum had a much bigger lead. It's sort of narrowed since the Michigan win. You know, I fundamentally think right now Romney can afford to lose Ohio. He's going to lose a bunch of states, probably some of the southern states. And so I think he can afford to do that because he's basically established two things. First, as I say, a sort of identity with the upscale Republican voters, of whom there are a lot just in state after state. And second, he tends to be acceptable to almost all parts of the party. Among pretty conservative voters, he does okay. Among mainstream voters, among moderate voters. There's a very conservative, he doesn't do okay. But among the center of the party, he does okay. So he's in the enviable position of being able to survive some defeats. The downside for where he is right now is that he's lost what he had a month ago, which was a clear narrative of who he was that was appealing to independents. He's now become much more conservative, have a tax plan that's much more filled with debt because it really doesn't pay for the tax cuts, and so he's made himself a weaker candidate for the general election.
Now, what of Ron Paul, Newt Gingrich, and Santorum himself? You just said that Romney can afford to lose.
Yeah, I'm not sure he can afford to lose because I think it saps enthusiasm. That little video that Kwame showed in the setup piece of Mitt Romney 2002 talking about raiding the public treasury, it looking like Don Draper out of Mad Men, didn't he? I mean, really sort of a striking similarity. But that undermines his narrative against Santorum and Gingrich.
Who's the insider?
They're the insider. They're the ones who are corrupted by all those years on the banks of the Potomac and staying inside the cloistered Beltway. And he was the outside, the white knight. It was a little bit tarnished. Ron Paul has to win somewhere. I mean, people ask, what's his motive? Does he want a convention speech? I don't know what his motive. I think he wants to influence policy. I think he wants some vindication. He's the only candidate in the field, Jeff, who has not had to revisit his positions, has not had to rewrite his record, hasn't had to try to repudiate past statements. He's been consistent, but he's got to win. And Washington State, where he finally is going after Romney as well as both Gingrich and Santorum, it may be his best chance. Idaho, they're spending some resources on. Newt Gingrich has to win Georgia. He probably, it looks like a three-way race. Santorum has given him a real tussle there. But he really needs a victory in Georgia, and an impressive victory too.
You see the same stakes for those?
I guess I do. I'm sure Ron Paul has to win as much. I think if he can rack up delegates, and he's paying a lot of attention to delegates, if he can just get a lot of delegates, he'll emerge at the convention. There'll be a lot of people on the floor with Ron Paul signs, and I think that's more or less what he wants in terms of future influencing the party. Gingrich, he has said he has to win Georgia, but he still has this money sitting out there. And the oddity of the thing is because of Citizens United and all these super PACs, candidates who lose, as long as they have a couple rich billionaires or maybe even only one, they can keep going. And so the perversity of Citizens United is it prolongs primary campaigns. It makes them tougher and uglier for the party. And the real perversity is in the short term. I don't know how it'll be election after election. Right now, it's all helping Barack Obama by making the Republicans mutually unattractive.
Well, let's turn to him. He was out in the country this week, big speech to the UAW, and part of the narrative for him seems to be, look, things are getting better.
It did. I mean, he would have, I think the president would like to keep the Ohio and Michigan primaries going in perpetuity because, as one leading Republican in Ohio told me, I was out there this week, he said the auto thing is working for him here. It helps the president.
He was able to say, we went in and we did something.
Yeah, I mean, there's not a lot of mention about other necessarily initiatives, but this is one that Americans celebrate each day. The further good news from the auto industry, and the president. I don't think it's morning in America. It's no longer midnight in America, and maybe there's a hint of dawn. But I think that there's a little bit of getting ahead of the story. But I think that things are improving, and that's good. I think identifying with optimism is always good for any leader, and picking up on the sound that Clint Eastwood articulated so well at the halftime of the Super Bowl. I think building on that with the reality of what's working in both Michigan and in the Midwest in general, and Ohio in particular.
Does the president have to be careful with this message because of potential dangers ahead?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, he lauded the Chevy Volt, and Chevy just announced the Volt is suspending production for, I think, 5 weeks because of slow sales. So you do have to worry about getting out in front. And I would say the political mood has gotten a little out in front. There's a mood now that Obama's cruising to victory. The Republicans are sunk.
Really? I mean, you sense that?
Certainly a lot of Republicans feel that, and even a lot of Democrats are beginning to feel, oh yeah, we're going to win this thing. And that's too far out front. If you still look at fundamentals, is the country headed in the right direction? They're still very negative. If you look at things like the economy may slip back, there's still some expectation of slow growth for the remainder of the year. So the mood has shifted a little too far. I had a very smart friend who's a Democratic consultant, said, you know, Romney's going to look dead 6 times between now and November, but he will keep drifting back because fundamentally the country really does want change. And Obama's central policies, healthcare stimulus, are still fundamentally unpopular. And so things will look bad for Republicans, but it's too soon to say.
Is it your sense that the Obama folks in the campaign know this? I mean, that they can't get too far ahead of themselves?
I think there is, but they've been down so long that now that they're up, they're feeling pretty good, I think. I agree with David, but the sort of the conventional wisdom, Jeff, just a matter of 4 months ago was that Obama was gone. Republicans were quite bullish. In private, they would talk about they couldn't wait to get him. Now those same Republicans are pretty glum. I mean, they found that Romney is not caught on. After 2 campaigns, he still stumbles, as he did over the question about the Roy Blunt amendment in the Senate this week. He did that. He's done it time and again. This was in the aftermath of his great victories in Arizona and Michigan. He comes into Ohio and stumbles on that. So there's a certain loss of confidence there. But I don't think there's any question. David's right. Between $5 gallon gasoline and Democrats will not be nearly as bullish.
All right, just a couple of minutes left, but just to pick up on that, because while we're talking about domestic events, in the meantime, the world is too much with us, as Wordsworth put it, right? Syria, we just talked about at the beginning of the program. Afghanistan, Iran, a meeting with Benjamin Netanyahu for the president coming up. How do all these things bubble up into the world that we're talking about of politics? And
well, first, thanks for bringing Wordsworth into it. You've elevated our tone here.
I am doing the best I can.
Yeah, it's tough. To me, the most important thing globally that Barack Obama did this week was give an interview to Jeffrey Goldberg of The Atlantic, where he talked about Iran. And what was striking about the interview was he said it is unacceptable in terms bolder than I think he's ever used before for Iran to get a nuclear weapon. It will not happen. And he really send the message to Israel, we've got your back, and we're not bluffing. And so part of that was to hold the Israelis off from doing anything rash. But part of it really was laying down red lines, as they say. And it was quite a bold, quite a sophisticated interview. It's worth reading online. But quite a bold statement by the president saying, it's not going to happen. It's just not going to happen.
This is ahead of a meeting, the AIPAC meeting.
The AIPAC meeting and a meeting with Benjamin Netanyahu on Monday.
Right. What's your sense?
I agree. I thought the interview is well worth reading. But the president, I thought, was just sending a message to both sides. I mean, that we're serious about this, both Iran and Israel. Israel don't act, and Iran, you better be very careful. At the same time, we're looking at our 3rd potential war, at least that's being rumored, in 11 years. And is it too much to ask that we have a public debate on this, that it not be conducted in interviews with distinguished journalists or just on speculation? I mean, is it too much to ask that the president make a case for sending Americans into harm's way, and that the Congress of the United States, especially with this fever about the Constitution and returning the Constitution, that maybe declaring war or debating whether we go to war is timely? It just this is, we seem to be just sort of elliptically heading into a confrontation, and a serious one.
But your sense is that now is the time to have that?
Now is the time to have it. I really do believe that.
I agree with that. I don't think short-term sanctions are going to work to deter Iran. I'm very dubious about the bombing Iran. I don't think anything's going to work, to be honest. So I assumed, well, we just learned to live with a nuclear program, but apparently that's not going to happen.
All right. David Brooks, Mark Shields, as always, thanks a lot.
Thank you.